all. In this video, I would like to talk about Lambda functions. What is Lambda function? Why do we need a Lambda function? And I'd like to show you as an example what it means to have a Lambda function executed, and we'll go from there. Hope everyone likes this video. Please feel free to subscribe and share with your friends and family in case if you find this interesting. That being said, let's just get started. What is Lambda function? A Lambda function is nothing but a serverless environment where we can use the resources on demand versus having a purchased or pre-purchased necessity of your compute and memory, right? So it's a serverless environment where you can just execute your piece of code or your API functions or anything with regards to your scripting, something that is serverless, where you really do not have to manage your resources, where all you really need to concentrate is making sure your piece of code, your piece of the execution that you want to make sure that is compute intensive is set up in a proper way to be run on a serverless environment on demand or on a periodic basis. Why do we need this functionality? Why do we need a Lambda function? Why do we need to have a serverless environment? A couple of advantages here. The first advantage is you don't have to pay for the resources continuously. All you need to pay is when you have this function or script that you built is executed for that certain amount of time, right? It could just be 1 millisecond to 5 milliseconds to 5 minutes or whatever the case might be on a periodic basis. Let's say, for example, you have a script that you wanted to execute on a daily basis, so you don't need a full server to run that script. You just need an environment where you can run that script and get the output as per your configuration within your script, right? So that being said, let's just get started. I'm going to show you as an example, and I'm going to also talk a little bit about some of the examples on what you can do in further, by just getting started on the Lambda functions. So all right, that being said, in this demo I would like to show you as an example. I would like to have an API functionality where I can get some response for the API calls that I make, to make sure I can use that response in further consequent steps. Or maybe I would like to use that response in further functionality where I could just store somewhere in the database or an S3 bucket or somewhere onto your have that information sent over via email. You can do all kinds of stuff, but in this video I just want to concentrate on very basic stuff so that you can just get to see the functionality of the Lambda function, what it means to have a serverless environment versus on-prem servers, or maybe your computer machines that you use on a daily basis, or an EC2 instance within your cloud, or maybe within any of the cloud provider resources, right? So that being said, I'd like to quickly get started. The first thing that I want to make sure is I set up few stuff here. So the first thing that I want to make sure is having a code editor installed on your machine, so that you can if you wanted to replicate, you can always replicate, or in case if you wanted to do this or just review, that's fine as well, depending on how you feel this and how you wanted to execute. So that being said, I'd like to just set up a quick script so that you can see that on how I'm executing it, and then you can replicate it as well. So Uh, so for that, I want to make sure I have a code editor installed. In this case, in my case, it is Visual Studio Code. I do have it installed. I do have a version control repository or a version control mechanism installed. In my case, it's Git. And in case if you prefer it, you can always install to make sure you store your code in a GitHub repository or any other version control repository that you may use. But it's an optional thing. Sometimes it depends on the scenario, on the size of your script, size of your dependencies that you may have. Like, let's say in my case, if it's since I'm using AWS Lambda function, it's pretty much, it should be less than 20 MB for me to just directly upload a zip file which contains all the scripts that are needed, plus also the dependencies that are needed for my Lambda function to be executed successfully. Hope I'm clear there. I'll just get started. So in this case, I'm just creating a new folder for me to just replicate the scripts, and then we will take it from there. All right, so I'm just gonna add a folder, and under here I'm just gonna create a new folder. Let's say I'm just gonna name it as Green Noise. In case anyone is not familiar with Green Noise, it's a threat intelligence sourcing company where you can search for any of the indicators of compromise that are known to be suspicious in your environment. I'm just using an example where because I can just have access to the API or the community API, I would say, for me to just query my IP addresses, domains, and whatnot, so that I can just get some information about an IP address in my case. But in case if you may have a different use case, you can always go for that as well. So I'm just naming this as Grey Noise Lambda function, right, and then just creating this folder on my machine. So, and then I'm just clicking on add here, so that I'm right into my workspace, a Grey Noise Lambda function. So as you can see here, pretty much I am within this environment where I'm directed directly to the folder. So in this case, I do have Python installed because I want to make sure I run my code via Python environment, and I want to make sure the Lambda function that executes properly is have all the dependencies that are needed to have this Python code executed. So in this case, I do have Python right. So as you can see here, I do have that. So all right, so now let's try doing some stuff. For example, I would want to make sure I create a virtual environment first. In this case, I would just do Python -m vn. So what it really does is it creates a virtual environment so that it doesn't have to create any dependency issues with the other projects that I have on my machine. So as you can see, a virtual environment is created. Now I'm just going to activate this by source venv. That's the name of the folder that was created. Bin activate. So now I'm on my virtual environment. So in this case, if I do a pip list, as you can see here, it only has these two packages that are installed in my virtual environment, where it's containerized on my machine at the moment. So now let's start creating our scripts, because I want to make sure I do have my scripts, but I want to make sure that I do have all the dependencies that are needed for the Lambda function to be executed properly. So let's go deep dive. So in this case, first first things first, we want to make sure I do have the proper scripts. I do have the necessary code that is needed to execute my function properly. Again, you may have a different use case, or you might want to run a function that is respective or relevant to you, I would say, right? So all right, so that being said, so as you can see, I do have Python 3.9, and I'm just gonna go ahead and create my scripts. So in this case, first things first, I already created some scripts, but I'm just gonna make sure I write them to the right folders. In this case, lib site packages, and I'm just gonna have my files created here. So let's see here. So let's say, for example, I do have this script, right? So I'm just gonna name this script as, let's say, Lambda function .py, okay, and I'm just gonna paste this script in here. So there is this script, right? Like I said, I'm just gonna use gray noise APIs for me to just get some information for an IP address. You might do something else as well, but in this case, let's say, for example, I'm just using the community API, which has some level of free access, I would say, or a premium or freemium access, I would say, right? So I did write some code here, right? You might have a different programming language that you might be familiar with. In this case, I'm familiar with Python, so I'm just using this as my API reference calls to get the necessary information that I need. So in this case, as you can see here, I do have import requests. So what I'm saying is basically I'm just importing that request library, and I do have a function get a gray noise data, and I'm passing in IP address parameter and the API key that is needed to get the necessary information out of gray noise API, and I'm also passing the API key as a header, and then I'm just getting the response. If the response status is 200, then I would want to return a response.json, the JSON that's being captured from this URL for that specific IP address as a response, or else just print out error with the response code and the text that it spits out. And I'm just passing in the API key and the IP address that I wanted to run, right? And in case if you're wondering, like, where can I generate this API key, you can always if you're just replicating everything as you're seeing, then you can just go into gray noise API gray noise website, and then sign up with your email, first name and last name, then log into the system, and then that's if you were to do some clicks, and then that's where you can just generate the API key, and then you can pass in here all good stuff there. And then I'm just trying to get some data out of this. So let's say, for example, I'm just trying to execute this, right? So let's say I want to execute this Python 3. I want to make sure I save this first. Control S, Python 3 Lambda function. No, I'm not in the right folder, so I'm just gonna go to this directory where I did save. There is one specific reason why I did save this Python file in this specific directory. I'm gonna give that in a moment. So I'm just gonna go into venv lib Python 3.9 site packages, and that's where I'm in here. And you can see my Lambda function. I'm just trying to try executing this Lambda function. So it basically prints out this error. Basically it's saying that I don't have the request module for me to execute this code, right? So I'm gonna install this pip install request. You can install via pip, so it's just gonna install that. So as you can see here, it also added that pip package into this site packages folder or directory. Now that being said, I can execute this script, and it gives me the response here. The response is this. That's what I wanted to print, and as you can see here, all good stuff. I'm just executing this code on my local machine, it's working just fine. What if I wanted to execute this code on a periodic basis, or maybe I do have a list of IP addresses that I wanted to pass in, and I wanted to store this specific output in a S3 bucket, or maybe I want this output in an email. You can always do that. You can get as granular as possible in this case, but I'm just trying to give you that high level insight on how to create a Lambda function, what it really means to have a Lambda function executed within a serverless environment, right? So when I say serverless, it's still using some compute resources that we do not need to manage, just as an information here. So all right, so as you can see here, it just printed out this print gray noise data colon. Exactly, it's printing the same what I'm requesting for, and then you're all good to go. Okay, now I wanted to convert this code into a Lambda function that I can deploy to the AWS Lambda, right? So I'm just going to create a new file here. So let's say, for example, I would like to name this as gray noise Lambda function .py. Okay, I already did write this code for your information, in case if you're wondering. So I don't want to spend some time in writing the code, because the real functionality and goal is to ensure that I do have you understand what a Lambda function is, what it means to execute within AWS cloud. Right, as you can see here, I did write. So some of the changes I want to highlight is, I adjusted is, in this case, I did had a different function named as Lambda underscore handler, where I'm passing in the event and context, and I'm also passing in the function that I wanted to execute, in this case get underscore gray noise underscore data, and assigning that value that it's being returned from this into this variable, right? So if there is data within this variable, then it's going to print out that information, or else it's just going to return fail to fetch gray noise data. All good stuff. I did have this additional code in here. So now if I were to list this out, there is this new file called as gray noise lambda function.py. All right, so I do have all the packages that are needed to run this specific script. In this case, the package that is absolutely required is the request, and if I were to install this request, it did install few of the dependencies as well that it needs in order to have the request function, the request module properly leveraged, I would say. And now, all right, all this good stuff, you do have all the necessary files that are required. I'm just going to create a zip file. So zip space r space, I'm going to store this somewhere. Let's say I'm just going to name this as gray noise lambda dot zip, and then I'm just going to have all the files within this directory to be part of the zip. So I'm just gonna press enter, right? So now I do have the zip file somewhere located like 4 directories back, right? So as you can see here, this gray noise lambda is created all under coding, gray noise lambda function, gray noise lambda dot zip. All good stuff. I do have this file. So now I want to have this file loaded to the Lambda. So first things first, if you do not have an AWS account, please make sure you create an AWS account, and once you type in Lambda in here, you can see the service Lambda. Run code without thinking about the service. It basically prints that clearly. Now I'm just going to create a new function. I'm just authoring this from scratch. I'm just going to name this function as gray noise lambda function, and I'm just gonna have this runtime as Python 3.9 and the architecture. So I'm just going to create a new role with basic Lambda functions. In case if you wanted to have your own custom role, you can always do that within the IAM console. But I'm just going to create this function. So it's going to take a moment to have this function created. And it's going to create a function, sorry, the role named as this guy. It just got created, all good stuff. Now, all right, as you can see here, the code source is basically gray noise lambda function. Lambda is going for function.py. There is nothing in here. If you were to test this, it's just not going to do anything. Right, it does have some response code and all good stuff, but I wanted to have my own function executed within this environment. So in that case, I did create a zip file. I'm just going to upload that zip file in here, create upload, and then I would just click on gray noise lambda, which is the file name, the zip file name, and then I'm just uploading and then saving it up. So let's say, for example, if the file is more than 20 MB, please make sure to upload it to an S3 bucket and have that S3 bucket path added in here so that it executes accordingly. All right, so now I just did that. After I did that, I want to make sure I edit this handler to make sure I point out the proper file that it needs to execute against, right? So in this case, the file name is, I'm just going to go back to my code, gray noise lambda function.py. That's where my code is. That's where my lambda handler function is. So I'm just going to go back here. I would say gray noise, sorry, I want to make sure I type this right, function dot lambda handler is where it's pointing out to. Now I'm just going to save this. Right, so let's say, for example, now I want to test this, right? I can use this test function. So this is just the old execution that I performed, but if I'm going to test this now, okay, now I get some log issues. Okay, good stuff. So we can do some troubleshooting here. Gray noise lambda function. All right, gray noise lambda function. All right. Lambda handler, gray noise lambda function. go into my coding, gray noise, and then I'm gonna upload the function, and then upload, and let's try testing it now. There we go, it did execute. In the previous scenario, I just tried to push a wrong file that just caused this not to execute. I didn't change anything, as you had seen over the time, but as you can see here, it did execute. I did pass in an IP address within the script itself. This is the IP address that I did pass, and it came out to be classification to be malicious, across this IP address. That's as simple as it can, but in case if you wanted to develop this further, maybe you just wanted to pass in, like, let's say 100 different IPs or 1,000 different IPs, and you wanted to have this function to iteratively go through each and every IP and get the result, whether it's malicious or not. You can always do that with this capability somewhere within the cloud, where you do not have to have intensive resources. So depending on how you see this fit, you can always do that. Maybe you just wanted to add a new trigger where it basically where you wanted to have this function executed on a daily basis or something. You can always do that as well. But yeah, this is just a quick example on how the Lambda function is going to work and what it really means to have a Lambda function created within the cloud. That's very simple, easy to use, and you can always further do. One thing I want to highlight is, like, let's say in my code, I tried to use the IP address as a hard-coded mechanism, but let's say, for example, you wanted to pass in as a dynamic IP address, you can always do that. Maybe you just want to have that as a variable, and then you can just say click on environment variables, and then you can just create a new one. So this way you might need to adjust a little bit of the code, just so for your information, like adding the OS module into a script that would allow you to pass in the environment variable. But that being said, that's straightforward. You can just put in an IP address and then test it to see the result of it. So that's pretty cool stuff, right? That helps you to take this further. Maybe you might have 100 different functions where you wanted to call in or invoke the main Lambda function for you to get the necessary output as desired per your need. All right, that being said, one thing that I want to talk a little bit is having this code pushed out to a GitHub repository. In this case, I do have this code, all good stuff. I'm just gonna initiate this. I do have git install, so I do have this. I'm just gonna run some commands. Once I initiated it, basically, I'm just gonna check the status of the git. As you can see, nothing is version control at the moment. I'm just gonna add this to track any changes that are being made to any of these files. So I'm just adding all the current directory folder. Now I'm just gonna commit. Right, let's see the status first. As you can see, these are all the new files. For the version control, it thinks that these are all the new files that are part of the repository. Now I'm just gonna commit and then say my first repo, right? As you can see here, git status, nothing is everything is committed now. Now let's say I wanted to push this to a remote repository. I would want to make sure I go to my GitHub account and then create a new repository in here. Let's say, for example, I would say gray noise repository, and then I can involve. I'm just going to keep this as private for now and then create this repository. And now I would want to make sure I copy these commands, right? So let's say I'm gonna paste it here. Now git status, right? Now I want to make sure git branch -m main git status. Now I want to push this code to the repository. Git push u origin. It basically talks about the origin and then which branch that you want to push to. In this case, it's main. Now let's try to refresh here. There we go. You can see all the committed dependencies that are needed for this specific gray noise lambda function to execute, but also the scripts as well that are being committed to or pushed to this specific branch. That's easy as you can get in case if you want to track this, and to give you that high level version control mechanism in place as well, in case if you were to adjust this code and improve. That being said, I'll take a leave. You please feel free to share this video in case if you like it, and try replicating this in case if you wanted to get any further. If you have any questions or concerns, please comment on this video link that I'm gonna post now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day or night wherever you are from.